Oh man, that was a bizarre week.
Yeah, that was a long fucking show. I feel like it's been days since we started recording.
I know, I know, and like random players are making a comeback from week one. I feel like I'm going back in time. There's random players popping off. It was definitely a long Sunday. Really strange games, strange outcomes, but I guess that's what happens in week 11 of the NFL. It's not going to get any more normal, with all these injuries and all these random backup quarterbacks, or even now restarting quarterbacks back in the game.
Yeah, or whatever you want to refer to Taysom Hill as. I mean, if you ran into that buzzsaw, good luck. If somebody beat Taysom Hill, they give themselves a
Yeah,
pat on the back. Just call yourself a superstar because
yeah.
that performance from a tight end. I mean, whew, kill it.
His stat sheet was so funny. It was like every category was filled with some sort of statistic.
Yeah, he's the first person ever to run for 100 and throw for 10 and have 50 receiving yards. Like
Crazy.
a weird accumulation of stats for sure.
Yeah, that's a bummer if you definitely played against him. I wish you the best of luck. I had him, and honestly, just watching his score go up, I was like, this doesn't make any sense. I think he ended up with like 50, nearly 50 points. It's pretty nice to have in your tight end spot when he's not really a tight end. He's like a running back, especially when tight ends are such a terrible shit like position this year.
Yeah, no, it's been such a wasteland. I had him in one league early and had a good week, and then he was out for so long I couldn't hang on
Yeah,
to him. And so it was like I was planning to get him back, but had a couple of tight ends, and now somebody else scooped him up. So it's hard because he's so inactive so many weeks. It's like you got to roster him just to have those 2 or 3 big weeks a year, and just take your lumps the rest of the weeks. Whereas a lot of tight
right.
ends might blow up, not to that extent, but they also don't have that bad of low weeks as he does. But hey, he's got a role. He's a startable guy, especially at tight end.
Yeah. I I want to check in. We have a couple games left, but we have 3 more weeks after this for the playoffs. Where are your teams at right now? I'm kind of doing okay, but I could be better.
Yeah, no, we'll see what happens with these night games, but it's looking like I've got a couple of teams that are just gonna sink under 500 now. A couple of 5 and 6 teams, but the rest of them are doing pretty well. It looks like playoffs for 3 of them, and then the other 3 are going to be down to the wire. Right at 500, just under 500 now. So you know, could be worse, could be a little better, I guess. But fantasy, it's kind of like if it all adds up to 500, that's more or less how this game's built these days.
Yeah, with the two records, too, if you're playing two records, I was by far the best team going in after the draft, but then Dak Prescott goes out, so CeeDee Lamb drops, right? Nico Collins doesn't come back until this game tonight, and then you have Kyron Williams, who's not scoring anymore, who was like a scoring machine. It's just like the way things ebb and flow. Even Ricky Pearsall, I was like, oh, he's gonna. I had Brandon Ayuk. He's gonna go out. Ricky Pearsall comes in, and he gets a goose egg after a great week. So I'm definitely floundering right now in that league. One, I'm in first place, which is nice, and the one that I'm in your with you, our league of record, I guess people call it. You and you're in a pretty good spot. I'm trying to make a comeback. I'm trying to prove I'm not that bad at fantasy football. So but Taysom Hill definitely helped me in that league. So it's crunch time right now. The playoffs are literally right around the corner, and every win and loss matters so much now moving forward.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like it's just right to that spot, but here we are. We've got tons of bye weeks coming up next week, and next 12 and 14 are just brutal for buys. So,
Brutal.
the teams that set themselves up well through those buys, I think are going to have a big advantage because there's going to be teams that didn't realize it, and all of a sudden they really need to win week 14, and they look at their team and they're like, how am I going to win with 8 guys on fucking buy? I mean, that's just
Right.
not sustain not sustainable, not going to happen. I mean, it's just so It's tough, and especially this time of year, there's if it was week 4 or 6, you'd be able to pick some guys up off waiver. Now it's like if you need to pick up some guys up off waiver, you're just throwing darts.
I think they should end past week 12 buys for fantasy purposes. There's so many weeks to have buys. Why does it have to be week 14, It's so late in the season. Also, yes, fantasy wise, it's a bummer and it is fucking annoying. But I feel like it's kind of a disadvantage to finally get your bye week by week 14. It's so late in the season to get your bye week.
NFL teams, yeah, no, if you have banged up
Yeah,
players or whatever, unless you're going to make a playoff run, it's not helpful at all. And I even have one league
right.
that I just saw is playoff start week 14. So it's like,
Crazy.
that's unfair to whoever is going to get just the raw end of that one. Or maybe
Yeah.
it's an advantage if you had all your buys in week 14, you didn't take any buys all regular season, sneak into the playoffs. I don't
It's
know.
true. That is a bold strategy. I would love for someone to have done that.
Yeah, I don't know if they planned it that way. But then also too, they're talking about moving to 18 games. I mean, once they move to 18, then you're really gonna see like, are they gonna push bye weeks till 15 or
Yeah.
16? Like they really need to take the fantasy football aspect into account, because it's one of those things that if all of a sudden everybody was so frustrated they just stopped playing fantasy, I mean, those NFL ratings, they don't know how much they could dip, but they could dip,
Yeah.
especially that red zone. I mean, that's what
That's all that people
that's
care
that's
about.
there. Yeah, it's like people
Yeah.
who are watching red zone that don't play fantasy are few and far between.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. And man, we talked about Saquon Barkley. He's clearly was a top stud this week. He had 26 carries, which is crazy. He probably wants a bye week this week. But he's interesting
He gets the mini
because
buy since they played on Thursday. So
that's true. He does get a mini bye. I I'm I'm interested in Saquon Barkley because I'm curious how efficient he will be. Is it because it's like Derrick Henry where, hey, I'm pounding it? He had like 20 carries and only like 60 yards at one point, and then he broke out those 2 runs. Is that how the script for Saquon gonna tire you out, and then break off these big runs? Is that sustainable for fantasy if you want to make that final playoff push?
I think that's kind of always been Saquon. Like I remember even in his rookie year, there'd be a lot of times where he'd have, 15 to 20 carries for like 60 yards, and you're like, man, this is a bum game. And then he'd rip one off for 20 yards,
Yeah.
20 yards, 40 yards, 60 yards, whatever it might be. And so I think he's definitely, this is him. Like he's just a stud that sometimes is going to have huge games, and sometimes he's not going to produce because he didn't get that big run. Like he really does need that big run to be super efficient. So that's kind of what Saquon Barkley is at this point, I think. But he's got the
Yeah, and
durability. I wouldn't be worried about him taking too many hits or too many carries. I mean, he's built to be able to withstand it.
yeah, and again, like the 2 touchdowns came on like two massive runs, and with the Jalen Hurts there, still doesn't seem like they're gonna do much besides the push tush on the end zones, the goal line. So something to watch. I like Saquon still, but 26 carries and it took a couple big runs to get to that 146 mark. A little deceiving, but he is still Saquon Barkley, and I mean he's those are some incredible runs. All right, we'll just get out of the way. We kind of mentioned it in the show, but now you can make fun of me if you want. I know you've been like, hey, why not start Anthony Richardson? um, 272 yards passing, which is a huge improvement, a touchdown, and then what we've really been wanting from him is 2 rushing touchdowns at 32 yards. Look, you don't get to play a bad defense week in and week out, but this is a great way to get your confidence back for sure for Anthony Richardson. Is he viable for the rest of the season? Or do you think it has to be based on matchups? Or do you think this may be a one off? I mean, he has had more terrible games than good games this year.
Yeah, I mean it's tough. He's got a new ceiling at least for this season, so
Yeah.
that's a huge bright spot. It was like in theory he should be able to finish as a top 5 quarterback, but he hadn't done it yet this year. But 2 rushing touchdowns for a lot of quarterbacks is like, oh man, that's crazy. But for him, it's like, hey, I mean, he could
be
have
the norm.
he could have 3. Like they don't get in that brotherly shove, too much. But
Right.
if they got to the 1 yard line a lot, I think he's going to be sneaking that in himself. So there's that extra bonus. I think the biggest thing holding him back is the team just isn't that good. So I don't expect them to be scoring prolifically. Jonathan Taylor has not been what he was supposed to be. Like he should be a top 10 back, but he really hasn't been. Like I don't know exactly what it is with him, but I think he needs good blocking to really be super efficient. I don't think he has that breakaway speed or elusiveness or power to run through guys. And so I think Anthony Richardson, kind of the ball's in his court, and maybe it took him having his career on the line. It wasn't just his job. I mean, this is his whole career. Like if he doesn't work out in Indy, is a team gonna let him be a starting quarterback? Is he gonna be a backup quarterback and play like a Taysom Hill role? I mean, I think he'd be amazing in that Taysom Hill role. Like I think it might be more fun to watch him play in that role and just get 10 carries a game, 5 passes. Like I'd love to see him catch passes, but at the same time, he's got such a cannon that they're going to keep trying to develop him as a quarterback. He's kind of, I mean, that's why you draft a guy that high, is for that ceiling. If you can develop him, he could become a Josh Allen, or he could end up being, a bust. So it's hard to say. His legs help him. He's got to keep relying on his legs. Like, I think he's got to be a little bit quicker to go to the run, 1-2 reads and then run.
Definitely. Anthony Richardson, his goal is to get out of this season looking like there's still hope, right? That's his whole goal. That there's still something there, and this is a good first step. Now, we can also talk about how terrible the Jets are as a team in general. They win one game against Houston. Clearly, Houston was, hit with a ton of injuries at that point. And CJ Stroud had no one to throw it to. He had like guys like us out there throwing it, running routes that he didn't know where they're at. The Jets are terrible, and I'm curious to see when the Colts start playing. The divisional rivals, the top, like that division is actually with Miami and the Bills. Like that's a tough, that's a tough division. And once he gets to those opponents, I'm curious to see. I just want to see him. I don't need him to be, a top 5 quarterback. I just curious, can he still put up numbers? Can he still run? To your point, like that's what I'll be looking for. Is will the intangibles be there, or will he implode like the first, the week 2 through 6 underneath a lot of pressure?
Yeah, I thought him probably quarterback somewhere between 10 and 20 for the rest of the year. Yeah. So 1 quarterback leagues, you probably don't want to start him, but if Jaden Daniels is on bye week 14, it's not a bad option off the waiver wire to grab a guy like Anthony Richardson. If he was dropped, I'm sure he's going to get picked up in a lot of leagues this week by teams that are just hoping to catch lightning in a bottle, or if you're one of those low-end playoff teams, like, if you just have an average quarterback, I'd probably rather start Anthony Richardson. If you don't think you're going to win, at least he's got that ceiling that could possibly win you a game any week. And I think the expectations were just too high. I mean, I don't know what about the Colts makes you think they're going to win their division. They're going to compete in the AFC. They have a below average D. Their wide receivers are fairly suspect. Their run game isn't what it was. I just don't think they have anything that's elite. So, you're asking this guy in his, still less than a full season of starts to be your star and to carry you. And I think it's just an unrealistic ask.
It's not good when like everyone's like, "Oh, these are your sleeper picks," and they're like 2 rookie wide receivers for the Colts. Doesn't show a lot of promise there, a lot of experience outside of Michael Pittman. And we all know how you feel about him. All right, Taysom Hill, redraft league. How much you dropping, Fab? Are you dropping a lot? Is this again another?
If you need a tight end at this point of the season, I think it's time to drop what you got left. I mean, really, almost all what you got left, because if you need a tight end too. I mean, if you've got a high end tight end, that's one thing. But again, we might not see much more of this, but he's with the way their season is gone, they're out of wide receivers, so he's actually catching the ball now. So that's a huge bonus, especially if you're in a PPR league. And then
What
Alvin
year is it?
Kamara,
Taysom Hill and MVS are like the lead receivers on the
right? And
team.
it's like I don't know where Alvin Kamara is, but he's either worn down or they just don't think he has it this time
Right.
of year. And those goal line play, I mean, he's not even in the goal; he's just in the red zone. And Taysom Hill's a threat.
Right.
Like he just has a good feel for it, and he's running that read with Kamara. So it's one of those things where it's just the two of them. One of them's going
High
to run.
percentage chance. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you just have I think a higher percentage chance of him scoring a touchdown than really just about any other tight end in the league
Right.
right now.
No,
I mean,
you're
Josh
right.
Hart hasn't been a touchdown machine. Kelsey, I mean, he's father time is catching him quick. I mean, that's going to be this year or next where he's done. So, I mean, I think Taysom Hill is about as good of a tight end as you'd ask for.
Yeah, I do think like Taysom Hill adds so much more. Tight ends are so low. I think that Taysom Hill is someone you have to go out and get, or it's going to be, or you're going to have a tight end. You already know what the ceiling is. It's probably like 4 catches and 40 yards. I'm assuming because that's most tight ends right at this point, right? So, yeah, I mean that's going to be good. And then one quarterback. I don't. Yes, the Jags are terrible. The Jags are god awful, and we saw that. But Jared Goff looked masterful against them. He was running that offense nonstop. They could do whatever they wanted to. Jared Goff seems like a guy who would be a great spot starter if you need the matchup and if you need a quarterback. I mean, that guy to be able to throw 412 passing yards and 4 touchdowns in a game where they're already blowing him out by the third quarter, not even third quarter, by halftime, and they're just like, let's run in after this. That's a good sign. That's a good sign for Amon Ra. That's a good sign for all the Lions players. I didn't even top studs. We put Jared Goff's name out there, but it really was just the Detroit Lions in general.
Yeah, no, I mean, Goff had a big game. I think the most encouraging thing is you see Dan Campbell just continuing to run up the score. I mean, that's one of those things where there's sometimes where teams get up 2, 3 touchdowns and all of a sudden the backups come in or they're just running the ball and they're just still slinging it all around.
He knows
Especially
the pain.
in his home games. I mean, Jared Goff's definitely a solid start on those road games. Some of those matchups. I mean, he can get shut down. He's kind of that's why he's more of a QB2, like that kind of back end QB1. Is he's very matchup dependent. Like I don't want to start him against the Steelers, against the Niners, against teams that are pretty solid,
Sure.
but bottom half defenses, sure, like low end defenses, like throw them out there, expect a big game. I think it's certainly within the possibility, and nice to see Brees Hall get going for the Jets. I mean, we've seen Aaron
Yeah.
Rodgers a little slow. He's everything's kind of revolving around the pass, and I think they really need to lean on Hall in the running game, get things going, or Brees Hall as a receiver. We saw him do both. He had a rushing and receiving touchdown this week. It's over 100 yards combined. I still think we haven't seen close to his ceiling for this year. I think we thought he was going to be better. Obviously, he was drafted as a top 3 running back, and none of those top 3 running backs have returned that investment. So, kind of tough if you're a Hall owner. Hopefully, you got a team around him, and it's going to be December that he some games because once the Jets are eliminated, I don't know. It could be tough. It could go the other way, and he might just kind of take a back seat, and they let Braylon Allen get some run and try to make sure everyone's healthy for next year.
Yeah, the Jets are an interesting team. You really have to see what they have to. I don't know if they even went out at this point, if they're even going to have a shot. So that's going to be difficult. Jauan Jennings, before we talk about some of these bums, is he worth getting? I mean, first off, the Seahawks felt like he was the most targeted wide receiver, so they didn't want to guard. They didn't want to follow him on that one drive, and he had like 6 catches on that one drive and that touchdown. But it looks like out of all the wide receivers, Jauan Jennings has been the most, I'd say, most targeted. Now, I know George Kittle was out, so take take that into account. Is Jawan Jennings worth picking up and holding on, or even starting if you're really desperate?
Oh
I
yeah,
just don't know what that pass
I
game
think
is
if he's
doing
lucky if
right
he's
now.
available right now. Really, I mean, I think he's been picked back up the last couple of weeks. I think if he's still out there, you definitely want to grab him. But I think he probably has already been grabbed, and a lot of people were starting him. You know, it depends on your wide receiver situation, but if you need somebody, I think he's a solid flex or even wide receiver too if you need it because he's outproducing Deebo Samuel. I mean, so you wouldn't have any hesitation starting Deebo Samuel. So Juwan Jennings is producing better than him. I don't know if Debo's a little banged up and we just don't know about it, if he's aging or just all these injuries have kind of taken a toll on him. But Juwan Jennings seems to be more of the intermediate and deep threat, whereas Debo is an underneath kind of guy. So I think Juwan Jennings has the higher ceiling of the two, and I think he's probably pretty close to a must start. You'd have to have some really good options to not be wanting to start him.
Let's talk about Deebo Samuel. A terrible performance, 4 receptions, 22 yards. He looks lost right now. I think that part of it is that offense keeps getting hurt, then gets healthy, gets hurt again, and gets healthy, and he's like doing a million things and not really finding a groove this season. It just seems like, especially that Seahawks game, so different the routes that he was running versus the first time they faced off each other. He had that long wheel route for a touchdown, and now we're seeing nowhere near these routes and nowhere near these explosive plays and opportunities now that Christian McCaffrey's here. Jawan Jennings is kind of coming out of his shell, and George Kittle was out and he still wasn't getting much. It's a little scary, and Brock Purdy just has not been consistent this season. He's been on and off some big games and some horrible games like this one, and you need your quarterback to really step it up and feed these mouths. There's a lot of mouths to feed in San Francisco, and I just don't think this year's offense is the type that will feed all the mouths.
Yeah, it seems like in the past, Debo got the ball really creative ways. You'd always see him
Yeah.
get 2 or 3 screens a game. The rushing was, where he had this huge ceiling because he was getting carries, goal line carries, coming out of the
Right.
backfield, passes out of the backfield, and we're just not seeing that same effectiveness. And he's never been that big down the field threat. So yeah, I'm not quite sure what's going on. I think maybe there might be some sort of nagging injury, something that's not stopping him from playing, but is enough that he's just slowed to the point where he's not quite either as physical or as fast, and it's really taken a toll on him. And we've seen quite a few different receivers that have kind of had these down games, and a lot of them are number 2 receivers. Devontae Smith, 4 for 29, Jalen Waddle, 2 for 37. These are guys that are just not at the top of the pecking order, and I steered away from him. A lot of people really liked him coming into the season. Solid flex, wide receiver 2, whatever it is, and I just think their ceilings are so capped because they're not going to be the number 1 receiver. If they have a great game, it seems like Tyreek Hill and blanking on AJ Brown just have better games. And so it's like it really takes like everything going right for them to have a big game and just only a few things going wrong for them to just have dud games. We see it, and we see a lot of middling games. It's like 5 for 60. It's like that's not going to win you much.
Yeah, I just think quarterbacks are just throwing at that volume. I think maybe Joe Burrow throws at that volume, and that's about it right now, right? We're not seeing 40 plus attempts anymore, which is, I don't know what script was flipped. Maybe they're like, hey, 18 weeks is a long time. We can't be chucking it. There's a lot more clock management nowadays than I've noticed in the last few years. There's just a lot more. There's not that many quarterbacks chucking it 40 plus times a game. And to your point, then that means that they can't get it to the second wide receivers. Devonta Smith was a 5th round pick in redrafts. These same with the what's it called? Same with Jalen Waddle. Those guys were high end picks because they thought that they'd be mouths to feed. And then you have injuries, and then you have the game script being different this year in the NFL. These second wide receivers are just not the same. Even Brandon Ayuk before he got hurt, right? He wasn't getting anything either. So I just think the script is changing a little bit. second wide receivers are not as viable. People are just running the ball, and we've made this point. You've called it out, and these running backs aren't getting hurt, and they are still in the game late and in the season late. So why not keep going to your workhorse? And there's not as many blowouts I'd see. Like, yes, you have the Jags blowout, but it's a lot tighter. Teams are keeping it closer, not chucking it when they're behind. It's very methodical now. It's very different.
Yeah, I think defenses have adjusted. They're playing still more deep shells, trying to avoid the deep passes. Especially they started early in the season and they saw it was working and they kept with it. And it forces these underneath passes. And when you're completing more passes, the clock's not stopping. You know, we had so many incompletions that are stopping the clock. You know, games that are taking forever. There's so many games that I watched this year, and I'm like, oh, they just had 4 drives and it's halftime. You know, or it's like, oh, okay, like now we're into the second half, scoring's going to start happening, and then they just have 4 more drives and the game's done. You know, it's like if you can sustain long drives and burn clock, there's only 60 minutes in the game. You know, it's not
huge.
Every team gets 10 drives or what. You know, it's not baseball where you have a set amount that you're going to play, and so some games we see, you know, we just haven't had those games that have been shootouts back and forth, and that's what you need for that crazy high fantasy production. Is you need a 35-42 game. You know, you need those big scores on both sides. And we've just seen so many times this year, it's maybe one team blows things out or things stay tight and close, and then it gets pushed out, or things just go back and forth all the way. Like we saw with Baltimore and Pittsburgh. I mean, have you said before the game that was going to be an 18-16? It's like, I don't know about that. But then, you know, when it's all said and done, it's like, well, that's very AFC North of them to
exactly
win a game with 6 field goals. It's like, well, you know, that's 6 good drives, I guess. You burned a bunch of clock. You know, it's like Lamar Jackson only had 207 and a touchdown, like also threw a pick. I mean, for a lot of quarterbacks, that's not the worst week. For him, it's horrible. You know, he didn't run at all, you know, but at the same time, the Steelers were able to control the ball, control the clock. They drive the ball down 6 times for field goals. Okay, I mean, that's probably more effective in the area of that you just burned so much clock and you controlled the ball as opposed to the fact that you're getting 3 points.
Right. No, that's been a huge theme. And, you know, that's the tough part about fantasy right now, that your guy can, even if he's a star, get cut out of the game plan depending on. And so, especially your wide receivers. All right, real quick, out of these 3 running backs, who are you least worried about? Tony Pollard, Aaron Jones, Jonathan Taylor, all bad games this week.
Least worried about, I'd say Jonathan Taylor. Just he's the only one that really has no competition for work. And I mean, I guess Anthony Richardson's a little bit of competition if he's going to steal his touchdowns. But I just think he's the most featured. He's the most talented of the 3. You know, I mean, yeah, down weeks for all of them. But I just don't see Aaron Jones as being a feature of that team. Like, I think if he had been there for a few years, I'd have a little bit more faith in him. But they just haven't quite figured out how to use him right. I mean, he needs to have receiving yards to really go off, and it just seems like Sam Darnold is on a downward trajectory at this point. Like, I just don't have a lot of faith in him in this stretch run.
He is who we thought he was. All right.
Yep, he'll be a free agent soon. Somebody will be able to sign him, most likely.
Yeah, the magic's worn off. It struck midnight, it seems. All right, a guy I think that you should pick up off the waiver wire if you want. And we talked a lot of shit about him last week, but Nick Westbrook-Ikhine. Clearly, Will Levis likes this guy, so I can't ignore it. I thought Calvin Ridley would really have a massive game, but Nick Westbrook-Ikhine showing off like crazy break off speed, and that's the reason why he's still young. Now I see a good guy to go get.
Yeah, you have a 97-yard touchdown reception, 99, whatever it was.
It's crazy.
Pretty easy to help pad the stats, but yeah, it looks like Daniel Jones done. We've been talking about it for a little bit, so go out and grab Drew Lock, Tommy DeVito. Not exactly sure which one's going to end up starting, but I could see them both start at some point through this stretch run. I think it's kind of a crapshoot either way, but super flex, why not? Give him a shot.
Yeah. Yeah, and I like Amir Abdullah, Zamir White. Man, what a terrible season that guy's had, and now he's just injured again. I think Amir Abdullah is just worth grabbing, holding on to, and see what happens the rest of the season. I have no faith in that Raiders offense, but you just like to at least have pieces that will have touches. That's all. It's the name of the game at this point.
Yeah, Bo Nix went off again this week, had a really good week, and we're finally starting to see Marvin Mims emerge. Had a really nice bubble screen for a touchdown. He's getting some work in the running game as well. So it looks like they're finally ready to feature him a little bit more. Go out and grab him. Hopefully I can get him back. I dropped him, of course. Finally, was sick of waiting on him, doing nothing, and now all of a sudden he finally goes off.
I like the gadget plays. I like the deep shots. They're really utilizing his speed, which I thought they would do more with his rookie year. So, you got anyone else? I think this is squeezing, right? Everything's squeezing. I'm like, I don't know who else to pick up. Everyone's fucking gone.
Yeah, the next guy is for next year, Noah Gray. I really think
Yeah.
Travis Kelce's clock is just ticking, and we finally saw Noah Gray get a couple of touchdowns. I don't think it's really like a guy that you want to play this year, but grab him, stash him, hold on to him. I mean, as far as next year goes, like I just can't see Travis Kelce playing another season. He just continues to look slower and slower, more worn down. He's got plenty of off the field things going on, and win or lose this year, it's either the reign is done and they're not winning 3 straight Super Bowls, or they won 3 straight Super Bowls, historic as all as it could possibly be. It's the perfect time for him to retire, I think, after this season.
Yeah, I just don't think he's going to be. This is a shell of himself. I don't see him, and I wouldn't, if I'm in his shoes, take a step back in a backup role. There's just not, why do that when you can just go off to the sunset? I totally agree. We'll see, though. These athletes, sometimes they don't know when to go. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I think his brother retiring and having the time of his life is going to help him kind of
That's true. That helps.
nudge like that. Or he had to miss a Taylor Swift concert that his whole family was sitting front row and he was back at a football game. It's like,
Massive FOMO.
I mean, if he was still playing in his prime like he did last year, he still had it, I would say he's going to stick around. But at this point, his juice is, I mean, it's just really gone. I think he's saving it for the playoffs and it'll look better in the playoffs. But at the same time, it's like the amount of work that it takes in the off season every single day. I mean, I bet he wants to eat some, fried food, just some junk, like just eat some unhealthy shit. Like, just move on. It's one of those things. There's no reason to stretch it out. He's got the Super Bowls. He's got the notoriety. He's got the contract for the podcast. Go be a Swiftie and live your best life.
I mean, yeah, he has so much more fun out of this. So yeah, it is very motivating to take a step down. So we'll see what happens. All right. Well, next week, sir.
They're letting us go. Finally. Out here.
I still don't know who's dropping these videos, but we'll fucking find out soon.
So we're gonna find them and we're gonna steal their caffeine.
Whoever's asleep, that's everyone will know. Everyone will know that's the guy.
Yeah, get fired for napping on the job. That was you.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Our whole plan, secret plan coming together.